This is Rudy Gonzalez of the Texas Wrestling Academy here in San Antonio, and you are going to be seeing me live on Hannibal TV.
This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com, and today is my special guest. I have a man who is the trainer of Daniel Bryan, probably his most successful student, as well as Brian Kendrick, Lance Cade, countless others that he's going to talk to us about. He's been a guest trainer at the WWE Performance Center several times. He's had his own successful wrestling career in the territories. He also worked for WWE numerous times back when they would use locals on their cards. So, Rudy Gonzalez, thanks a lot for joining us today from San Antonio, Texas.
Thank you, man. I'm a big fan of yours, so thank you. It's a privilege to be on your program here.
I think you hold the record for having the thickest neck of anyone I've interviewed.
Thanks. You had a Barbarian on yesterday or something, didn't you?
Warlord.
There you go.
Yeah.
I would hate to imagine my neck's thicker than his. Jesus.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Wow.
Maybe his was thicker in his younger days, but is that just natural, or did you used to be an amateur wrestler or something?
No, well, years ago. I mean, I've been in sports all my life, so when we did football and stuff when I was in middle school, we always did the neck bridges, and that was sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, and then freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, and then when I got out of high school, I started the Southwest Championship Wrestling Academy that they had, and Larry Lane was a trainer. And Larry Lane was high on doing bridges and neck exercise because he was a former amateur wrestler also. Okay. And so we did neck bridges. We did a guy pushing your head down, and you'd have to pick your neck up, and then they would pull your head up, and you had to push your neck. I mean, he was high on neck exercises. And so, yeah, one time it was kind of hard finding shirts and stuff. The collars were kind of tight and stuff like that. But I haven't done any neck exercises for a while, so it's kind of just stayed there.
Well, it is handy to have that in wrestling with all the bumps that you take. And back in the days when people would take chair shots to the head, of course, that's going to help with impact.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned you started at the Texas or Southwest Championship Wrestling Academy. Was it hard to break into the business when you started? I guess that was the early 80s, maybe?
80. So my first day that I walked into the wrestling office was January 2nd, 1982.
Okay.
And I wasn't a wrestling fan. I tell my students, I tell everybody the same story. I wasn't a wrestling fan when I got into wrestling. I didn't. There was nothing to it. I was nothing that intrigued me. My dad took me to a couple of shows when I was 9, 10, 11 years old or so. And I remember Wahoo McDaniel was on that show, and Pork Chop Cash, and Johnny Valentine, and Sherry Martel was just starting, I believe. I mean, this is a long time ago. And I'm sorry, Rick Martel. And so it just didn't intrigue me. My dad watched wrestling stuff, so but I'd sit in and watch with him on TV. It'd come on at midnight here in San Antonio, and it was Joe Blanchard's promotion. It was at that time, Joe Blanchard and Fritz Von Erich were partners, I believe. And so the program was All Star Wrestling, and Tully Blanchard was a referee. But at the same time, Tully Blanchard was a high school quarterback here in San Antonio. And so my dream, my goal, whatever, was to be a high school football coach at my school. And so I played one semester of college football, and I came home for the Christmas break, and I had a conversation with my football coach, my high school coach, and he asked me, "What are you doing to stay in shape?" And this is 1981, and 82 or so, and back then in San Antonio, there was maybe 4 or 5 gyms, and it was like $50 a month. And my parents, they weren't wealthy. We weren't broke either, but they just felt there was other things to spend money on than sending me to the gym to go work out. So I told them I don't know. I go back to school January 15th, so I'm not sure what I'm going to do. So my coach said, his exact words were, "I'm not telling you to get into professional wrestling, but my friend is starting a wrestling school the first part of the year, which was 1982, and a lot of the guys that wrestle for him are former football players. So maybe you might want to go talk to him, and he can let you work out. Tell him I sent you. He's a good friend of mine. Tell him I sent you, and he probably won't charge you, but he'll give you something to do until you go back to school." I was okay. Who do I talk to? He said, "You're going to go to this address and ask for Joe Blanchard." And by this time, Joe had already separated from Fritz, and so he was starting. He had already been he had already been running Southwest Wrestling for a couple of years. So Blanchard, I thought, oh shoot, that's Tully Blanchard's dad. That's so I was a huge fan, and has nothing to do with wrestling. I was a huge fan of Tully because he was the top quarterback here in the area. There
Right.
was Tully Blanchard, and then there was a guy named Tommy Kramer, so who played for the Vikings. So I went to the office January 2nd. It was a Saturday morning. It was cool. I remember it like yesterday. I walked in the office at 10 o'clock. There was a lady sitting there, and today we're good friends. Her name's Charlotte. There was a lady sitting there. She goes, "Can I help you?" And I said, "I'm here to see Mr. Blanchard." And she said, "What are you here for?" I said, "I'm gonna talk. I need to talk to him about training." And she said, "Well, he's not in the office right now, but they're starting to train next door. Um, if you want to go there." And she goes, "Did you already pay?" And I said, "No. That's why I need to talk to him." And she said, "Well, who sent you?" I said, "My football coach did." And I hear in an office behind hers, "Who's your football coach?" And I said, "George Pasachek." He goes, "How's Big George doing?" I said, "He's doing fine." He goes, "Come on back here." So she's like, "Go on back." So I go back there, and Joe's sitting behind a desk, and he's doing some paperwork or whatever. And he goes, "How do you know Joe Bland?" He goes, "How do you know Coach Paschek?" And I said, "I played football for him." And I told him with the situation stuff. And he said, "All right." He goes, "You can train with us. I'm not going to charge you, but you got to go back to school." And I was all right, no problem. I had no idea that I was gonna being a pro wrestler was the furthest thing from my mind. And so I went. He took me to the other building, which is where we did our wrestling shows at. It was called the Junction, and they had some wrestling mats on the floor. They had the ring set up. Larry Lane was a trainer, and so Joe said, "Hey, he's only going to be here for a couple of weeks, so he's going to train with you guys or whatever." So that's how I started. Uh, a couple of weeks before, well, not a couple of weeks. I was supposed to go back to school on a Sunday, uh, but on Wednesday before, a guy named Juan Reynosa walked in, and he said, "Who's Rudy Gonzalez?" And I said, "I am." He goes, "You want to make some money?" He pulled me to the side and said, "You want to make some money?" I said, "Sure. What do I got to do?" He goes, "I need help with the ring tomorrow. So can you meet me here at 9 o'clock in the morning and help me set the ring up in Corpus Christi, Texas?" And I said, "Sure. Yeah, no problem." So I was there at 9 o'clock in the morning, uh, got in a truck, hooked up the trailer. We drove to the nearest convenience store, a gas station. He filled up with gas, came out with a 12-pack of beer. I'm 18 years old, man. I don't drink. So, when he got in the truck, he opened up the box or whatever, and I said, "I don't drink." And he said, "It's not for you, it's for me." So I was like, "All right." So we drove to Corpus, and by the time we get to the building, he's not I'm not going to say he was drunk, but he was. He had a couple, maybe had a couple of too many, you know. So he sat down, he pulled a drink up. In Corpus Christi, we were at the Memorial Coliseum, and you can actually pull the ring truck, the trailer and stuff, all the way up to where the ring sets up at. And so he pulls up, he backs up into the little area, and he sits down in one of the chairs, and he said, all right, he goes, unhook that chain there, unhook that here, pull that pole off, put it there, put that pole there, da 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 da. And so me going to Corpus Christi to help him set the ring up, I ended up putting the ring up by myself. All, all he did was get in the ring and run the ropes, you know, tighten this up more, tighten that up, and then, all right, let's go get some deep. You know, it took me about an hour and a half or so to put the ring up, and that was it. My job that night was to sit at the back door and make sure nobody snuck into the building. But from where I was sitting at, I could see all the matches. You didn't really see the crowd. Where my chair was, you could, if you look straight down through the corridor, you could see just the ring. The 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 view I had was just the ring. Couldn't see the crowd or anything. Could see just the ring. And so, you know, like I saw like Tiger Conway Jr., Dick Slater, Ali Bay the Turk was on that show. But the main event was uh, Wahoo McDaniel and Tully Blanchard. And and I try, and even today I try and watch wrestling matches the same way. Um, I had no choice but to focus on the match. The venue was dark, not like today. You see Raw, SmackDown, and there are lights everywhere and stuff. The venue was dark. There was one light over the ring, and you just saw these two guys just going at it, bam, 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 and every time Wahoo threw a chop, the whole place would like ooh, that type of stuff. Um, and if there was ever a point where if there was ever a turning point, that was it. Just seeing Wahoo and Tully go back and forth, and hearing the crowd react, and I was hooked. And so we took the ring down that night afterwards. We came home. Let me go back. So we took the ring down, and then Joe Blanchard asked me to help to walk with him to his car, so he could leave. So I walked with him to his car, and he opened up the trunk of his car, opened up a briefcase he had, and it was stacked with money. I mean, I've never seen, again, 18 years old, I've never seen that much money in my life. And so he pulled out a couple of bucks, he pulled out $75. He said, here, this is for you. And then he pulled out some more money and says, gives this to Juan. So I went inside, and again, like it's yesterday, all I see is money. So we drive back to San Antonio. Juan says, "Good job. If you want to help out again tomorrow, help out. Uh, Meet me here at the office. We got to go to Burnett, Texas, or something." So same thing. Next day, help out with the ring, security. Um, Finish the show. Walk Mr. Blanchard to his car again. Um, Gives me $75, and so now I have 150 bucks in my pocket. 1982, 18 years old. That's a lot of money. So then we get home. Juan says, "Hey, if you want to help out tomorrow." So the next Saturday night was Austin, Texas. And so same thing. And Austin was a bigger venue. Corpus was a decent sized venue. Austin was a good venue. That Burnett, Texas was like a show barn. And so the crowd was smaller, but it was still, I mean, uh, I just never experienced something that I thought was fake and people just eating it up, and then seeing Mr. Blanchard with his briefcase full of money, and so Sunday was a San Antonio uh, show at the Hemisphere Arena, which is the big venue. And I went. I helped with the ring, and that I was supposed to go back home, change, and go back to school. Except I didn't go home, I didn't change, and I didn't go back to school. I hid up in the upper balcony area of the arena and sat there and watched. And this was like my first. These are my first live events. Besides when I was 10 years old, these are my first live wrestling events that I attended. And same thing, Wahoo Tully, Dick Slater. I think Manny Fernandez was here at that time. Shabu Guru. I mean, and the place was nuts. So I went home, and I thought I was up, pretty late. I'm not gonna say I was up all night, but I was up pretty late. And I got up early. I went to the office. Joe Blanchard was there. I got there. I knew they did. We did TV on Mondays, so I knew they did TV. So I got there early, like 10 o'clock in the morning. And I walked in, and Mr. Blanchard goes, "Rudy, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Can I talk to you?" And he says, "Sure. Sit down." So I sat there every day. I would go and talk to him every in the morning. So he had his desk. He had a couch, kind of like on the side, and I would sit there every day. So then this was the first time I did this. So I sat down on the couch right next to his desk, and I said, he said something like, "When are you going back to school?" I said, "I was supposed to go today. I was supposed to start today." So what happened? I said, "I want to learn the wrestling business." And he said, "Sure you do. What's there to learn?" I said, "I don't know. I I want to learn the business. I don't know. I can go back to school. I can go to school here in San Antonio, but I want to learn the wrestling business." And he said, "You can go back to school." He goes, "Aren't you on a scholarship or something?" I said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "You can go back to school. It's free education, and then when you're finished, if you still want to, try this, you can come back. I'm not going nowhere." And I said, "I really, I'm 5'8" and
Yeah.
180 pounds. I'm not going to play in the NFL. So playing college football, and it was junior college football, and it did. I don't know. It just didn't intrigue me anymore. It didn't. I figured physical education. I could still get it here in San Antonio. I just didn't want to play football no more. Um, so I said I want to learn the business. I want to learn how this stuff works. And he sat there for, it might have been a couple of seconds. It felt like an hour though, and he stared at me, and he goes, Are you stupid?" And I was like, "Oh shoot, what did I get myself into?" He goes, Are you serious?" I go, "Yes." He goes, "Rudy," he goes, "this business will eat you up." He said, uh, "You'll always be broke. You won't have any kind of relationships. You're gonna miss birthdays. You're gonna miss anniversaries. You're gonna miss." He just laid out this whole doom and gloom stuff. And he says, "Is that what you want to do? Is that what you're going to sleep in your car? You're going to be homeless. You're going to starve." You know. And he says, "Is that what you want to do? And is that what you want?" And I thought about it, and I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yes." And he stared at me again. And again, it might have been a couple of seconds, but it seemed like eternity, man. And he opened up his drawer and he pulled out a set of keys. And he said, "Go mop up." He threw the keys at me. "Go mop up." I said, "All right." I didn't even ask. I mean, there's like a ring of keys, it was like a ring with about 100 keys on there. I didn't even ask him what key it was. I just said, "All right." And I grabbed the keys. And I went next door, and there I was trying to shoot. Not this one. So I finally got it open and started mopping. That was my introduction to pro wrestling.
How many nights a week were they running in those days?
7 days a week. Sometimes twice on Sundays.
So you could be anywhere, and then you have to go back to the office the next morning, even if you're getting home at like 2 or 3 a.m.
So I learned very quickly, um, doing the ring. You're the first guy to leave, the town,
Yeah.
and you're the last guy to get home. I was the last. I'm the first guy to leave San Antonio, and I'm the last guy to get to San Antonio. So, and Texas is a big area. So, um, the show's over at 10 o'clock, and we drove, and we had a show in Laredo, Texas. The ring truck couldn't go very fast. The speed limit was 55 miles an hour, so that's like a 3 hour, 4 hour drive. So I'm getting home at 2 in the morning. If we did Beaumont, Texas, Jesus, that's like a 6 hour drive. If we did Odessa, Texas, that was another 6 hour drive. If we did Wichita Falls, that was 8 hours. So you would get in late, and then you'd have to leave early the next morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning. Joe always wanted the ring set up and ready to go no later than 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. Um, so uh, you were always tired. You'd put the ring up, and then if you can catch a nap on the ring before the show starts. But then the town starts showing up about 4 or 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock sometimes. You got to eat. Doing the ring crew back in the early days was it wasn't it wasn't glamorous, that's for sure. But looking back now, man, I wouldn't trade 1 second, not 1 second of it.
And you mentioned $75 a night may have been the average. What would be like a normal day's pay in those days at a regular job? Like, would you make $75 if you were, let's say, working at a grocery store for an entire day?
I think back then the minimum wage was I think back then the minimum wage was 3.75 an hour.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
that was pretty good pay to hang out with the stars.
So hold on. He gave me $75 to help me out with schooling. When I started working for him, I wasn't getting $75. I was paying my dues. So some days I got paid, some days I didn't. And again, that didn't phase me one bit. This was back in the day when if you didn't know anybody, you didn't get into business. You had to know somebody. You had to be related to somebody. There had to be some kind of connection. So I learned very quickly that I didn't really belong, and I need I needed to be grateful for being part of you know uh, to be part of the crew. Um, I was a new face there, so a lot of the guys, uh, kayfabe was my name. So if I walked in the dressing room, kayfabe, and I'd like look around like, it did. I didn't know. I was completely. When I say this, I'm not exaggerating. I was completely oblivious to how the business worked. The guy Juan Reynoso I spoke of helped me a lot. Juan Reynoso, a guy named Eric Manheimer, a guy named John Martinez, um, and then every now and then like Chavo would, give me a tip, or Manny Fernandez would give me a tip, or Eric Embry, or some of the guys would like give me some kind of, hey man, don't do this. You got to make sure you shake everybody's hand when you walk in, or you know. But kayfabe was alive and well back then, and I was the outside guy. So there were, and I'm not saying that when I'm talking about the pay and stuff. I'm not bringing that up to try and what's the word I want to use? Call out Joe Blanchard or anything like that. Nothing like that. That was I didn't have a problem with it. But when he paid, Joe Blanchard paid me well. When I finally got to that point where I gained people's trust, and I was dependable. Which I try and preach to my students all the time now. Just try and be dependable. I was there every even though I wasn't getting paid, even though I wasn't part of the payroll. I was there every morning at 10 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes I went in and mopped up. No one ever told me to. They didn't have to tell me that. That was my job. If when I was done mopping up the junction, I'd go into the office and ask the guy that was in charge of merchandise. His name was Steve Stack. I'd ask Steve, can I, need help folding T-shirts? Yeah, Rudy, go grab those and fold them up. Count how many there are. I did all that stuff, and then at some point, Joe finally saw that, and the other guys as well saw that maybe this guy might stick around. And it wasn't like a matter of a couple of weeks. It was maybe a month and a half, 2 months, maybe. It was a while. But again, when I started becoming part of the payroll, Joe paid me well.
And you mentioned about the shaking everyone's hands. For any of the fans that don't know that, in wrestling, if you don't shake absolutely everyone's hand on the card every single day, you can get heat. But you mentioned you were being kayfabed. Would that include the heels? Would you attempt to shake the heels' hands?
Some of them, yes. So here's a story. One of the guys that was hard on me, and was Tim Brooks, Killer Tim Brooks. He just passed away, and so when I did the handshake and all that stuff, he was one of the guys that just would look at me and just that type of stuff. A lot of the other guys would, some of the guys would shake my hand and kind of like give me that weird eye look, and they just didn't trust me. So a few years back, maybe about 8, 9 years ago, one of Killer's students, he had a wrestling school up in Waxahachie, Texas. One of them called me and asked me, "Hey, would you mind working up here a show for Killer and stuff?" I said, "Sure, no problem." So I went up there and I did his show. He had like weekly matches or something, and at his house in the back, he had like a barn, I guess, with a ring in there, and he had like 100 chairs. So, and he's had weekly shows there. His living room was the dressing room. His bedroom was the office. So after the matches were getting paid, I wouldn't expect. I went to go do the favor for Killer because he even though he was grumpy towards me, and and the matches I had with him, man, I was scared shitless. Because kayfabe was so strong. And so, like the first time they said, "Hey, Rudy, you're working with Killer," and I was like, But he took care of me in our match. So anyway, so we fast forward to 10 years ago, and so I go. He calls me in the bedroom. He's sitting there in a chair, and he said, "Rudy, man," he goes, "just one thing for coming down here, man. My guys said they learned a bit from you and stuff from your match and stuff." I'm like, "Killer, anytime, man. Just let me know." He goes, "What I owe you?" I said, "You don't owe me anything. You don't owe me nothing." He goes, "Come on, I got to pay you." So I said, "No, sir, man. No, sir. I came up here for the specific reason just to tell you thank you." And he goes, "For what?" I said, "For being the way you were with me, man." I go, I even though you guys were hard on me and stuff in the beginning, I learned from you guys." And he said, "You know what, Rudy?" He goes, when you first showed up, I thought you were a punk." And I was like, "All right," you know. He said, "But you've done well for yourself, and you've got the school going, and you've got some guys that come out of your school. I've seen them." He goes, "So I'm proud of you." And I was like, "Man," and having a guy, I don't know who broke you in or anything, but you know, for me, for a guy that didn't belong in the wrestling business, for him to say that, just like, I'm like, "Hey, thanks a lot, Killer," and I walked out and I went straight to my car and I had tears rolling because that just meant the world to me. That this guy would say that.
How long into your actual training did they kind of let you in on the secret at the time that wrestling was predetermined? Because it sounds like you started training a bit, but you weren't fully trained by the time you got on the ring crew.
So no, I wasn't fully trained at all, and I didn't do anything on the ring crew but the ring and ring the bell and security, take the jackets to the back and stuff. Uh, I want to say around. So I started training around. In January. I want to say around November or so. Uh, Joe called me in the office. So now this is like 9 months later. So 10 months later, Joe calls me in the office and says, "You need to go down to this store. Tell Mike there that you need a pair of black pants and a referee shirt." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I go down to the sporting goods store that Joe referred me to. The guy, I tell, Joe Blanchard, Southwood Wrestling. He said to get a pair of black pants and a referee shirt. So the guy, "What size do you wear?" "All right, here you go." So the next day I refereed the first two matches. And even though I'd already been in the business for 10 months or whatever, I still wasn't smart. So believe it or not. So like when I did the ring, when I was doing the timekeeping and ringing the bell, I could kind of hear guys talking, but I I couldn't make out what they were saying. As far as I knew, they were saying like, "I'm gonna kick your ass" or just stuff like that. I didn't know they were communicating the way they were. So when I refereed, I do the first match and then or the first two matches, and they were the preliminary guys, the guys just breaking in stuff like that. And so I do the rules and whatever. The Wanderer knows to help me with the referee stuff. He says, this is the count here, this is the count there, and you got to do this. Take your time and that type of stuff. And so when I started refereeing, you know, uh, I was refereeing as a shoot. So if a guy, punched the other guy, I was really, you can't do that, cut that out, and or if a guy had the other guy in a headlock and he's calling a spot, they always turn their back to me, and I try and like, I would assume. This sounds silly, but it's true though. I was assuming they were saying something to me. So if the guy said, rah, 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 what was that? And they turned their back to me, and I can hear him mumbling, and I'd come around, hey, what'd you say? What, you talking to me? I think I did a match with Ali, was Coco Samoa, and I kept telling him, "What did you say? What'd you say?" And he just said, "Shut up," you know. And I was like, "Oh, Stu," And they'll until finally, um, and again, this may sound ridiculous, but it's not. It's back then the dressing rooms were separate. Good guy and bad guy. So no one, and I was doing the first two matches, so no one told me finishes. I just counted to three. If a guy's shoulders were down, I just kept counting, and then until finally, this went on for like a couple of months until finally, somebody, the main referee guy that was doing the main event, was going to get knocked down, and so then Butch, Jonathan Boyd was the booker, and he calls me over. He goes, "All right, so these guys, so and so is going to do this, so and so is going to do that. They're gonna bump the referee, and then when you see that happen, you got to run out there, man, and you got to do this, you got to do that." And I'm thinking to myself, how do they know that's going to happen? That's how that's how stupid I was. Uh, so that's how I got smartened up. That's how I started figuring out how to do stuff and how this whole thing worked. And then once that happened, then a lot of other things started happening. Guys started calling me, "Hey, can you show up to the junction? We're going to take bumps tomorrow. Can you show up at 10 o'clock in the morning? Can you? We're going to be there at noon. Can you? We're going to do high spots. Do you want to join in?" And guys started trusting me more. And and one of the main guys was Eric Embry and Ken Timms. And so that's how I got broken in, I guess, smartened up or whatever to the business.
How were the crowds when you first started? Because that was a hot territory at one point, but somewhere around the mid 80s, I think, is when it started to go downhill, maybe.
So when I started, uh, the sheep herders had just started getting hot. So everywhere we went, the crowds were we had good crowds. Corpus Christi, the main towns was San Antonio, Corpus Christi, Austin, Beaumont, Texas was always a good place. We would do Friday nights in conjunction with Paul Bosch in Houston. Uh, Odessa, Texas was always good. Laredo, Texas. Um, South Texas, the Valley were always good. Were always good places. And then we do little spot shows like Burnett, Texas, which is a small little community. But when they'd be wrestling there, the place would shut down early, and places like that. So everywhere we went, we had good crowds. I came in '82. Everything was fine. '83, '84, I started wrestling, and we were doing 2 shows on Sundays. Monday night was TV. We worked every night, Monday through Sunday, and then '84, and then '85. I think uh, the sheep herders left, and the crowds just dropped. Not a whole lot, but you could see the difference. And I mean, they were hot, and they brought in another tag team called the Maoris. It might have been the Maoris, who were a couple of New Zealand kids. Good guys, good workers. They just weren't as effective as the sheep herders. They brought in a couple of guys called the French Legionnaires, which was Frenchie Martin, and I can't think of the other guy. They weren't as effective either. Um, and then '85, I believe it was, is when Joe sold the promotion. We were actually on when I started. We were actually the first wrestling promotion to appear on the USA Network, and we're also doing like a show. I think once a month in Ohio, I believe. The guy that was promoting his name was, we called him Joe Pizza or Pizza Joe. He just passed away. But something happened where I want to say again, I wasn't really in. I, I wasn't really knowledgeable about exactly what was going on because it was none of my business. But either Joe was getting behind on paying the TV network, and there was a match where I believe Eric Embry just bled all over the place, and that was a huge no-no with the network. So those two put together, they didn't pull Joe off the network. Vince came in, paid off. The story I heard was Vince paid off what Joe owed, and took over the time slot. And so then you had USA Wrestling with WWF.
So you mentioned that they would do some shows in Ohio for whatever promoter that was. Would you have to drive up there, or would your flights be covered?
Yeah, the flights, and I wouldn't go. They just brought the main guys like Scott Casey, Manny, Chavo, the Sheep Herders, the Fabulous Blondes. They just brought, and I guess like they filled the undercard with local guys.
Okay. So once Joe basically sold, I guess you would just continue wrestling the Texas territory for other companies?
So what happened was, Joe called me in the office around February or so. We had just had like a big snowstorm in Texas, and everything just kind of went brr, kind of like the virus now. Everything kind of shut down, and it only lasted for a couple of days, but it pretty much hurt the business. Um, so Joe called me in the office one day, and he said, "I'm gonna sell the company." And I said, "All right, what do I do?" And he goes, "Do you want to keep on?" I had up to the up to that point, I had gained full trust of the Blanchards. Whenever they, Tully had already left the area. He was already in the Carolinas. So whenever they would go and visit him, I would watch the house, take them to the airport, drop them off. If I want to stay at the house for the week, I'd stay at their house for the week. Or, I never did though. I lived in an apartment not far from their place, but and then I pick them up, and so I had full trust of Joe Blanchard. So he pulled me in the office and I'm going to sell the promotion. And I said, what do I do? And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't know. He said, do you want to continue? Do you want to continue the business and staying in the business? And I said, yeah, it's all I've done since I got out of high school. This is all I've done. So he says, all right. So he writes down a phone number. He says, call Fritz. And back then there was Southwest Wrestling and there was World Class Wrestling, and they were rivals. It's Von Erich's against the Sheep Herders, or Von Erich's against whoever. It was very heated. So Joe said, call Fritz, and I was like, Fritz Von Erich? He says, yeah, he'll take care of you. And I said, all right. And I called Fritz, and I felt like I was betraying Joe Blanchard, the Southwest Wrestling, but it was a weird feeling. So I called Fritz up, and said, well, where are you at? I said, I'm here in San Antonio. So right before I started working for Joe, there was a guy named Fred Barron who worked for Joe Blanchard. And I wasn't around at the time, so I don't know the full story, but he ended up screwing Joe over and jumping to World Class. So Fred had an office in San Antonio, which through World Class, or World Class had an office in San Antonio through Fred Barron. So Fred said, well, Fred's down there, so give Fred a call and he'll hire you. I'll call him and tell him you're gonna to pick you up. I said, all right. So I called Fred Barron. He goes, all right, great, and so I started working for Fred Barron. Fred Barron and Joe Blanchard was like night and day. It was like God and the devil. It was just worst. If I say working for Joe Blanchard was the best experience of my wrestling career, working for Fred Barron was the exact opposite. I mean, really. So, and then so I worked for Fred Barron for a couple of months, and then behind Fritz's back, Fred bought Southwest Wrestling. So I ended up working for Fred out of, and still in San Antonio. And then it got to where he was not paying guys, and, the box office got robbed and stuff like that. And he ended up owing me money. And I called up Joe. What do I do, man? This guy owes me $400. What do I do? Joe said, quit. Go somewhere else. Go. Says, you're talented. You can work in an office somewhere. Leave. So I did. And so I worked for Fred for maybe a year, I guess, maybe not even a year. And that then Fred ended up shutting down, and this was like the beginning. So now we're into '87 or so. So now we're getting into what we know now as the independents. And so some guys just started buying rings or building rings, and promotions popping up everywhere. And so I just started working for whoever. And then I went to Mexico for a little while, and then I've always been in this area. So that was that.
When you knew the Blanchards, I know Tully probably wasn't around that much longer once you started getting in the business, but did you ever witness any of Tully's partying that he was known for back in those days?
No. I heard, but no. And whatever happens with I don't know how long you've been around, but whatever happens with the boys stays with the boys. So you would hear stuff in the dressing room like, oh my God, we did this and this, and he got so effed up, and that he was driving and hit the guy in the other car, and you're just like, but that it stayed in the dressing room. There was one night where we did a show in Corpus Christi, Texas, and we did Corpus Christi every Thursday. So who was I with? We just did the ring And we came back home. We dropped the ring off, and Manny Fernandez and Tully Blanchard had went to a strip club, and which a lot of guys back then they did their show and they either partied at the bar, locally, or they partied back to San Antonio and caught the last round or whatever at the local clubs here. So we go home the next morning and on the news, professional wrestler Manny Fernandez stabbed 17 times or whatever. And you're like, holy, what the? So what ended up happening was Manny and Tully had got back to San Antonio and uh, went to a club afterwards. And then at closing time, they went to a local Denny's, which is like a Waffle House. A little bit more classier, but they went to a place called Denny's. And so the guys that they pissed off went, were driving and they saw them because the building has these huge windows and there's a stoplight there. So they see them in the restaurant eating. So they go inside. And I think it was Tully that went to the restroom. And when he comes, or Manny went to the restroom or whatever, they surround the table and a big fight happened. And Manny got stabbed like 7 or 8 times or something. Pretty bad. And so, the story goes, Manny, told Tully had just bought a brand new Cadillac, uh, and so Manny kept telling him, I need to go to the hospital. I'm bleeding, and Tully said, no, call the ambulance. Which the hospitals were like right down the street anyway. And so Manny got taken to the hospital. But the funny part about that is, I guess it's really not funny, but Manny and Chavo Guerrero were involved in a big feud. And so Manny got put in the hospital. He was in the hospital Friday, and he was in the hospital Saturday. And Sunday was supposed to have been the main event, Chavo Guerrero versus Manny Fernandez, Mexican death match or whatever it was. And the place, we had a good, 2,000 people, 1,500 people, whatever. We had a good little turnout. And I remember they're trying to figure out how they're going to do this because Manny's in the hospital and Chavo's there. And then Manny walks in with bandages on his arm and stuff, and he still did the match. Stuff like that, man. There were stories like that, not that extreme, but stuff like that happening. But they always stayed in the dressing room, though. We never, you never, rarely saw anything on the news or got talked about outside of the dressing room area.
When you were working security for Southwest, I guess because the kayfabe era, was there any fan attacks you had to deal with?
So there might have been, but the one that stands out the most is I was now refereeing, and we were in Austin, Texas. Somehow or another, it was a finish where the bad guy got over. It was Manny Fernandez and Tim Brooks. So as soon as I raised Brooks's hand, the place just went nuts. They started throwing paper cups in the ring, beer, popcorn, whatever they can get their hands on, hot dogs. So Tim says, "Let's go." So we roll out of the ring, and he puts his hands on my shoulder. He's walking behind me, and in Austin, Texas, the aisle to the back door, which again, 1983 or whatever it was. Um, we didn't have these extravagant entrances. There was a back door in the back of the building. And so we go down this aisle, and all of a sudden, Brooks grabs me by the shoulders and just squeezes the heck out of my traps. He's like, "Oh, brother, let's go. Hurry, hurry." So I grab him by his hands, and we go to the back. We go through the back door, and there's a chair there, and he sits down, and there's a knife stuck in his thigh. And he sits down. He's like, "Oh Lord, oh Lord, oh Lord!" And I look, and I'm like, "Holy! I've never seen that before." So then some of the other guys came. They're like, "Oh my God, you all right, brother? You okay? You okay?" And they, he's like, you guys got to get it out." So like Manny and Al Perez and a couple of guys held him down on the chair, and then like Luke Williams or somebody held on to, a couple other guys grabbed his leg, and somebody just, it was stuck in the bone, and they just
Huh.
pulled it out, and some blood squirted out or whatever, and he just like closed the wound and he taped it up, and he's like, son of a bitch, you see who did it? And I'm like, I had no idea, but stuff like that, man, that was one of the extreme deals. Another time, I when I was just doing the security stuff, I walked a guy named Doug Summers to his car in the parking lot in San Antonio. And there was a bunch of fans that hung around the back door to get guys autographs and stuff. And so when the bad guys would come out, they were like, boo, you suck, that type of stuff. But so I was walking Doug Summers to his car, and he was getting in. He put his bags in the trunk, and he was getting into his car. And I was just getting ready to walk away, and a guy ran up and stabbed his tire and took off running. And Doug, like, grab him. And again, this stuff was all new to me. So it was like, what did this guy just do? I've never seen. Again, I wasn't a wrestling fan when I was a kid, so seeing people get so mad that they were throwing stuff in the ring and getting in people's faces and stuff like that, I didn't, I wasn't used to that. Tully Blanchard and Wahoo had a match, and Tully rolled out of the ring, and Wahoo went after him, and they started going back and forth, chop, punch, and a drunk guy stood up behind Tully, and he grabbed Tully in a full Nelson. And I remember hearing him. I was in the back of the building, but I could hear him like, I got him, Wahoo, I got him, Wahoo. And so Wahoo grabbed Tully by the top of his head and got that tomahawk ready, and he pulled Tully's head down and tomahawked the guy, the fan, on top of the head and busted him open. And the guy just hit the floor like a bag of bricks. He just plunk. And then Tully rolled back in, and Wahoo rolled back in the ring, and they finished their match and stuff. But yeah, stuff like that back back then, man, it happened. Fans would, it was a different world back then. Now, if a fan tells somebody in the ring, you suck or whatever, then that guy goes on Facebook or Twitter like, this fan disrespected me and he needs to be banned from the building. No, you want stuff like that. You want, if you can't take the heat, then you're in the wrong business, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, that's bad. I've seen that wrestlers now, they will get offended and they'll want the fan to be kicked out for hurting their feelings, which is pretty sad. And at the same time, I heard another wrestler recently apologize for calling a fan fat, and it's like, what kind of world are we living in where you can't call a fan fat anymore?
This lady went up to she came up to me, and she goes, I want to talk to the promoter. This was back in the 80s, and she said, I want to talk to the promoter. And I said, all right, is there anything wrong? She says, yeah, I want to report Eric Embry. And I said, okay. She said he's being a racist. And I was like, what did he say? He said, he called me a Mexican. She was Mexican. She said, he called me a Mexican. And I was like, you are. That's besides the point. But it's stuff like that, man. The fans would get they bought into whatever the guys were doing in the ring, man. It was just a different world back then. But that's what you wanted, though.
Yeah. And you mentioned Al Perez. He sometimes gets a bad rap. I interviewed him, and he seemed like a nice guy. How was your dealings with him?
Al was a great mentor to me. He one day I had just started actually doing matches, and I was riding with Al Perez and Manny Fernandez to a town, to Odessa, Texas. And so Odessa, you have to go down I-10, which is a busy highway, and you have to go down some back roads. So they're explaining to me, what I was doing wrong in my match or what I could do better and stuff. And I'm driving and I'm listening to them. And Manny says, "You understand what we're saying?" And I'm like, yeah, I know what you're saying. I know what you're talking about. And so Al Perez says, pull over. So I pulled over on the side of the road, and it's a 2-lane road. It's 100 degrees outside, and there's nobody out there except for the coyotes maybe. And so Manny's, they're like, all right, when you do this, you got to do that. And when this guy does this, and they went through a comeback of a match for me in the middle of the highway. Manny's taking bumps in the middle of the highway, going back and forth like during an actual match, like there's hundreds of people there in the middle of a highway. And stuff like that, man. They would a lot of guys would take the time, and especially Al, man, they would take the time and try and explain and teach and make sure you knew what you were doing and stuff like that. Great. Al was a great guy.
Did you ever encounter Bruiser Brody in your younger days?
I referee. It's on YouTube. I refereed a match with Brody. I refereed a couple of matches. I guess he liked me because at one point, Gary Hart was. This was after Joe Blanchard sold the company to Fred Barron. So Gary Hart had me taken out on a stretcher one day. I was paralyzed, and I was supposed to be out for a month. So I was out for a month, and then Gary calls me and says, we want to use you on the next show, which was going to be in Austin, Texas again. So I show up in Austin, and when Gary had me taken out on the stretcher, he explained to me what was going to happen. I was going to get paralyzed and what have you, and then he was going to bring me back, and I was going to start getting over. So I was like, all right. So when he called me after a month and said, meet us in Austin and stuff, I was like, all right, this is my spot. This is my time I'm going to be a star. So at the same time, they were doing a thing where Brody was taking guys out on a stretcher. So I show up, Gary shows up, everybody's putting the match together and stuff. So Gary says, all right, you're working with Frank. And I was like, okay. And he says, so just sell for him. He's going to give you this, he's going to do that. And then they're going to take you out on the stretcher. And I was like, all right. So I guess later on he told Brody the finish. And so Brody comes up to me and says, brother, didn't you just get taken out last month? I said, yeah. He goes, no, brother. He goes, that's not how it works. So he goes back to Gary, and they go back and forth with the finish. And Brody was actually going to bat for me, like, you just beat him a month ago, and now you're trying to do the same thing to him again. You can't do that to him. And I could hear bits and pieces of the conversation, and Gary was like, well, this is what I want, and, on and on, and Frank's like, Rudy's a good kid, man. He don't deserve that. Come on, we got to do something. So what they ended up doing was, I still got taken on a stretcher, but they did the finish to where I got pinned, and then Brody kept kicking me or whatever, and then the referee tried to grab him, and they threw the referee, and then the referee changed the decision to, instead of Brody winning, he lost by disqualification. So, even though I'm laying on the ground selling and I just got beat up, he raises my hand up and and the winner is Rudy Gonzalez, and then he goes back after the referee and starts beating the referee up, and so we go to the back and stuff, and again I was just there to work. I wasn't trying to be a star or nothing. And Brody said, he said, Gary wanted to squash you for some reason. He goes, but at least you got your hand up. And back then that meant nothing to me. But today I understand now. The intention wasn't. He didn't want to squash me like Gary was trying to do. And I appreciate that now.
And there's very few people that could say they hold victories over Bruiser Brody.
Well, no, exactly. And the funny thing is that on TV, they cut that part out. So Gary still got the last word in, I guess. But it is what it is.
Now, for your WWE appearances, you did a lot of enhancement work for them in the 90s. How did those opportunities come about?
So down here, there's a guy named, and he's a good friend of mine. Came in a couple of years before I did. His name was Dusty Wolf.
I remember him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good. Dusty's a good guy, man. And there was another guy named Ken Johnson, who actually did the, Jose is credited for training Shawn Michaels, but Jose was outside the ring. Ken Johnson was the guy doing all the bumps and stuff and whatever with Shawn. So Dusty and Ken were doing the enhancement stuff for WWF. And I'm not sure how it came about, but one day Dusty calls me up and says, "Can you make Indianapolis, whatever day, 2 weeks away?" I was like, "Sure, for who?" He says, "For Vince." I was like, "Yeah, how do we get in there?" He goes, "They'll buy you plane tickets and hotel and what have you." He goes, they just need a body." I said, "Sure." He goes, and they'll pay you well." I said, "All right." So we flew from San Antonio to I think it was Indianapolis or one of those places up north, and we would record like 4 different TV tapings, like USA Wrestling, Main Event Wrestling, All American Wrestling, whatever shows he had going on, Heat or whatever it was. We would record those. So sometimes you work 3 times in one night. The matches would start at 7 and they would end like at 12 or something. Um, so uh, I did the first time I went up there. You walk in and you sign. Arnold Scarlin was the guy that was doing the paperwork and stuff. Signed in. He paid you cash, and then you find the chalkboard and you look for your name, and there you are. And so I guess I did a good job because I kept going back, and it got to where uh, as soon as I'd walk in the back, like the first time, as soon as I walked in the back, Razor Ramon was like, Scott Hall was like, "Brother, do you mind working with me?" And I'm like, "I not." What am I going to tell him? No, man, I only work with Hogan. What are you going to tell him? So I was like, sure. So it got to where guys were, can I work with this guy or can I work with that guy and stuff? And that's where it was. When Shawn turned heel, when he turned on Marty, did the kick him through the glass window, whatever. The guy that he worked with the first match to get him over as, and I just told the story to my students the other day, was me, and it was because I knew, I knew when to sell or how to sell for him. The whole purpose, and all he told me was, "I need to get over, so I need you to help me." I said, "All right." He goes, "I'm probably going to do 5 moves to you, but they want us to go 6 minutes." All right. So he would, we did something. He'd give me a shot, and then I'd sell for him, and then he'd go to Sherry. She would do his hair and do the mirror stuff and spray him with whatever. I'm still selling it, and then when he did whatever he needed to do there, then he'd come back to me, and bam, we'd do something else. He'd go back to Sherry. Um, so I mean, a lot of guys now, they're, today they're like, "You were just a jobber," like, that was a bad thing. But we got paid very well for doing that stuff. And I actually seen guys that were enhancement guys, and guys like, the Beverly Brothers or whoever were like, "Man, we got to work with this guy." Oh Lord, So, and I don't think anyone ever said that about me. So it's kind of like a badge of honor. You were a job guy and you got paid well, and you got to travel around. It wasn't just the local areas. For a while they were flying us to different places also. Which was pretty cool.
And it's just like in a movie, there's guys that get beat up, but for some reason in wrestling, some people look down upon it, but they need people to make the stars, which might be one of the reasons there's not as many stars now, because they don't have as many of those enhancement matches anymore.
Right. It's a different product now. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that in a bad way, but you need. You can't always have two main guys. You know, every week. Every week, you've got to have a guy that gets over. I mean, dominantly over. You got to build guys up. To mean something.
Is there anyone that didn't treat you well? I know you were one of the regular guys, so you probably weren't roughed up, but we've heard some guys like Ludwig Borga, for instance, would kind of be hard on the enhancement talent.
No, I heard those stories too. I I can honestly say I was never mistreated. Never. I mean, I think part of that has to do with just some of the guys uh, were just hard to. Some of the enhancement guys were just hard to deal with. They took it as this is my spot to get my stuff in, and that's the furthest thing from you can like there was a guy that worked for Shawn for a little while when he ran his promotion named Mike Blackheart, and Mike did a match with two guys, and I want to say it was WCW, and Mike wouldn't sell, and they on TV they beat the heck out of him.
Oh, is that Danny Spivey and Sid?
Yes, there you go. Yeah,
I remember that.
And they beat and it started off bad, and that was just and I've read different comments that people have made about that. Well, they didn't do this, they didn't know. Mike just didn't want to sell, man. He did that when he was working down here with us. I'm too big to do that, and we're like, I'm like, dude, I'll kick you in the nuts. I mean, that's just not how you do business.
The craziest part about that WCW match is they didn't even edit it to fix that. They just threw it up.
Oh, I know, yeah.
WWE, I can't see them like allowing that to get on their TV, a jobber who's not selling any of the stars' moves.
I did one match with Virgil, and Virgil comes up to me, he goes, "Hey man, are you Rudy?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Me and you today. I want to do this, this, and this." And he went on and explained this match to me. We're only going like 5 minutes something, and so this was like this ordeal started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he'd pull me over in catering or off to the side. Okay, now what's the first spot? Okay, now what are we going to do after this? And throughout the day. So finally, our match comes on, and we lock up, and he goes, "What's the first spot?" And I'm like, "Ah, shit." So I'm basically telling him, calling the spots for him. I'm basically telling him how to beat me up in the match. And I go to the back, and Scott Hall was the first guy to come up to me and go, "Hey, brother, I'm sorry, man." He goes, "Man, yeah, guy, man." And I was like, I'm cool. I was all right.
What would have been the biggest crowd you worked in front of during those days working for WWE?
Oh man, any of them. I mean, all those, every, you know, they were capacity crowds. I mean, they just look at the old tapes. I mean,
Yeah.
the venues were nothing like it is now. Like now, you hear about certain parts of the arena were sectioned, curtained off or whatever. But back then, man, you walked the first show I did for WWF. You walk out and all you see are just an ocean of faces. I mean, it's just the first time is just you're like, holy, Jesus Christ. And I'd never been in front of a crowd like that. Even with Joe Blanchard and in his big shows and stuff, he didn't draw those crowds. And so it's a feeling, but you still have to keep that, whatever it is you want to call it. You have a job still you got to do. You can't let that crowd, um, take over and take you out of your whatever mindset you're in. You still got to go out there and do your thing.
Now, I guess you first met Shawn Michaels probably around that time, or did you know him from his early days?
So Shawn started couple of years after I did, Shawn went to a school called Randolph High School, and I went to a school called St. George. We're like the same size schools, but and our schools aren't even far from each other. So, as I said earlier, Jose's credited for training Shawn, but it was actually Kim Johnson that did the training. So, um, there were a few times where I would go pick up Ken to go on the road for a show or something, and I would have to pick him up at a wherever they were training at. And so I remember the first time Shawn was doing some flips or whatever, and Ken was in the ring with them. And I remember we were driving, and I was like, "Who is that? Who's that guy you're training with?" He goes, "That's one of Jose's students. Name's Sean Hickenbottom. He's all right. Got an attitude, but he's all right." And so that was, but I never like hey man, how's it going? I never talked to him at all. When Fred Barron took over from Joe Blanchard, Shawn was already doing shows, sent him to Mid South, I believe, and Kansas City and wherever. And then to try and draw a crowd, they brought Shawn back to San Antonio. And so we worked, but again, we were never like, hey, bro, hey, Rudy, nothing like that. It was just one of those, hey, what's up, shaking the hand, and that was it, you know. And then when I got to work for WWF, he was with the Rockers, and we'd pass each other in the corridors. Hey, what's going on? How you doing? Shake the hand. It was never like, how's the family? How are the kids? Nothing like that. Me and Shawn we weren't friends at all. He Shawn was a superstar guy, and I was a job guy, and we're just in two different worlds. So I don't know if you're leading on to this, but so when he called me to do his school, dude, I had no. Uh, I mean, as a matter of fact, when he called me, I had quit the business. I quit the business on Saturday and Wednesday or something. He called me up, and I hung up on him because I thought it was a rib. I thought someone was ribbing me. So the phone rings, and he's like, "This is." I'm like, "Who is this?" He goes, "It's Shawn Michaels." F you. Blick. I hung the phone up 3 times. And finally, uh, we talked, and I agreed to do the school with him, and we became very, again, not well. Not yeah. Now we are like, how are the kids and how's the family and stuff. Now we're friends, and the opportunity he gave me running his school, I can't thank him enough, man. I mean, that just came out of left field. Um, I did ask him one time, because in my opinion, I mean, Shawn had access to Barry Horowitz. Uh, who else was there? George South. I mean, if he wanted to use a enhancement guy for his school, Paul Diamond. I mean, Paul Diamond and him were friends, and Paul came in later, but you know, uh, I asked him why'd you call me? And he just said through the years he had watched me work, and he had kept up with me, and he appreciated the way I worked, and he and you know the way I worked and stuff like that, and he wanted his students to learn, because I'm the first to say I'm not a superstar. I'm not 6'3" and 240 pounds, and I'm not chiseled like some of these other guys, or those guys back in the day. I just knew how to work. Um, and he said he appreciated the way I worked, and he wanted his guys, his students, to learn the way I did, and learn the basics. And even today, 20 years later, after we switch over and stuff, I focus on basics, bumping, running the rope, psychology, that type of stuff.
So was Shawn in the room when you would be training, or what exactly was his connection to the school other than his name?
So Shawn was there. One of the things that he wanted to do was he wanted to run the school and be there every day. He had just had back surgery, and he was pretty limited on what he could do. Um, But that didn't really stop him, though. There are a couple times he still got in the ring. But so Shawn was there every day sitting outside the ring. In the beginning, it was Jose Lothario and Ken Johnson and me as the trainers, and then Shawn would be outside watching. And Jose was the one that was like, all right, show him this, show him that, show him this, show him that. Um, and then there was a fallout like within the first month with Shawn and Jose. And then it was me and Ken. And we did, and there was Shawn that was like, show him this, show him that, show him this. And then there was another fallout with Ken and Shawn. And then that just left me by myself. And so, uh, again, he just basically sat outside the ring. He was there supervising. There were some, and it wasn't all peaches and cream. There were some stuff. There were some times when we'd bump heads about something, but working with him, um, great. I have nothing. I have nothing negative to say about working with Shawn the students we had were incredible. The guys, you mentioned earlier, Brian Kendrick and Brian Danielson, still in the business today, very respected young guys. Lance Cade was phenomenal. Passed away a few years ago. But there's like other guys that didn't get signed that were just as talented. They just, you would know. I mean, right time, right place, and they just didn't have that. They just didn't have that time or place yet. But man, I've got nothing aside from working for Joe Blanchard. My first 3 years of was that 85 of 3 years of the business working for Shawn. The 2 years I worked with him, we did TV and we trained a bunch of guys and what have you. That's like the second greatest time of my wrestling career was working with Shawn.
What were Shawn's intentions? Because it seemed like he was possibly trying to restart a territory in Texas, but in the end, it didn't seem like you ended up training really more than a class or two of wrestlers.
I think that was his intention of starting his own promotion territory. Well, he did have a promotion, but Shawn never worked the independents. Um, he went from Mid South to Kansas City. He did the territories, and then straight to Vince. The independent wrestling, like and you probably know as well, independent wrestling is very different than the territory days. And so one of the things that really turned him off was, uh, for lack of a better word, was the behavior of some of the guys. Um, if we did shows and we would, Shawn would walk down and say, "Okay, you're going over. You're going to beat this guy. This guy's going to." Then whoever would be like, Why is he beating me? Why aren't you putting me over? Stuff like that. And that really turned him off because these are all independent guys that, not being disrespectful to nobody, but never made a dime in the business, but they're upset because they're not getting their hand raised and stuff like that. So me and him had a discussion one day, and I said, and seeing the guys that we were training, I told him, just give me 2 weeks, man. Give me 2 weeks, and we'll have a whole different crew. And so 2 weeks later, that's when Brian Kendrick and those guys started coming in, and we got rid of a lot of the older guys. But it was, even with the younger guys, some of them were still, well, these guys got to try out last time, so it's my turn now, and it's never your turn. You can't have that attitude, and that's what and some of the guys were just plain weren't that good. Um, so he got a little, how can I say it, discouraged. At the same time, Vince is, you got to come back, you got to do this, you got to do that, and so there he goes. And so one day in January of 2001, he came in and he goes, "I need to talk to you." And I said, "All right." And so we pulled over. We went to the side of the building and we talked. And he said, "I'm re-signing my deal with Vince, and I'm gonna close the school." And I said, "All right." He says, "Do you want anything from me?" I said, "No. I've enjoyed this." He goes, "Are you sure?" And can I take the school over? Because I get so back to 1982 to now to this is 2001. I never had any. I've never worked anywhere else but wrestling. So this is all I've known. And so I said, can I keep the school going?" He goes, "It's yours." He goes, "You just can't call it the Shawn Michaels Wrestling Academy because I'm not here no more." I said, "No problem." And so I took the school over, and that was it.
I see. And yeah, I understand your point. A lot of fans don't realize that you have just as many egos on the independent scene as you do in the WWE. They just haven't made it, but the personalities in the back are still the same. They always try and present sometimes that everyone's friends and happy in the back and will just go along with anything they're told. But at all levels, as someone that's booked for independent shows, you deal with the same kind of crap.
Right, right.
And for Daniel Bryan, he's probably the biggest, best known star that you've trained. He's on the Total Bellas show that does better ratings than NXT and AEW regularly. Plus, he's a multiple time world champion. He was a star all over the world before he signed WWE. Could you talk about your training with him and thoughts on his success?
I tell, even back then, I told all the guys, when you start doing this, even now, when you start doing this, put your foot on the pedal, don't let go. And what that means is, if if you want to be, a wrestling star, it's not just training from 6 to 9 every day. It's it's a whole lot more. Wrestling is this, but there's a whole lot of other stuff also. So, and Brian did that. Brian Kendrick, Brian Danielson, uh, Lance Cade, uh, and there was a kid named Shooter Schultz. I mean, and there were some other guys. Um, there were a couple other guys that followed that rule. Um, Brian was, if you would have told me the first day of his training, which was around June of '99, that he was going to be who he is today, really, there was just nothing to him. He was a nice kid, very polite, very well mannered, but there was nothing there. It was just a hardworking young man. Um, but like you said, I mean, he when they got signed to the developmental their developmental deals in 2002 or no 2001, and they went to Memphis. They were there for a while, and they got cut. Um, Brian Kendrick called me, and he was sobbing. "They just released us. What do we do? What am I going to do? Where do we go from here?" The end of their world just happened. And I said, "Come back here and move back to San Antonio, and we'll do. It's not the end of the world, man. You just got to keep pushing." So I think he ended up going to Louisville, but he was coming down to San Antonio to do some stuff for me. Same with Brian Danielson. He called me up and he was like, "What do I do, Rudy? What do this is all I want to do." I said, "Then don't stop. Just, you guys got an opportunity to get to go to developmental right away. Some guys say you didn't deserve it because, they did it as a favor for Shawn. So prove them wrong. Don't just." Shooter Schultz quit. He was done. He was furious when he got released, and I haven't seen him since. But Brian Danielson, I mean, he went to Los Angeles and he trained over there for a while. Then he went to England and trained there for a while. He went to Japan. He got hooked up with Ring of Honor and then Kendrick as well. I mean, they just kept they put their foot on the pedal and they would not let go. And that's just what you got to do, man. And Bryan, those two guys are the epitome of doing exactly that. So you know, looking back, then, you saw the drive. You know, they were always the first ones to show up to the gym. It was getting to where training with those guys was 9 to 12 Monday through Thursday or Monday through Friday. But then after a few weeks, Bryan Danielson and Brian Kendrick both came up and said, "Can you stay a little bit longer and work with us?" Sure, I have the keys to the building. Sure, I don't mind. So we would train from 9 to 12, and then everybody would leave, and then from 12 to 3, me and Brian, and then some other guys were like, "Well, if they're staying, we'll stay too." So it was like 5 of us. We'd stayed from 12 to 3, and just go over stuff. Just you know, uh, take a guy by the arm and hold his arm. What can you do with this arm? Well, let's try this. Let's try that. Let's try. What if what if you did this, then he does that, and we just did stuff, uh, and every you could see the wheels turning, and with those guys. Bryan would just like hold a guy by the wrist and just like, if I take this and I do it this way, and just different stuff, just uh, we do shows. They'd pull me off to the side, and would it make sense if I took this guy and he did this, and then I did that, and whatever, and you know, always asking questions, man. Always. I see some guys today that are very talented, but wrestling for them is Saturday nights. You know, they diet, they have the good look and stuff, but um, they don't, they don't put the extra work in, um, which it's putting the extra work in is just as important as anything else. I mean, you gotta commit yourself, and those guys did, man. I mean, when when Bryan retired from wrestling a couple of years ago, that wasn't an act, man. He was distraught. He was really, he was really hurt. Brian Kendrick, uh, same thing, man. He me and him had a conversation. He called me up one day and he just, uh, I don't know what to do, man. I've done wrestling all my life, and we had a conversation on the phone, and I said, "Look, man, I love those guys to death. I love, I can't say enough about them. But I told Bryan, I'll bring you down here. I'll fly into San Antonio, stay here for a couple of days, help me train my guys. We'll sit and talk, and I'll fly you back home Monday or Tuesday." And so we did. He flew in like on a Wednesday. He did like a little clinic for me on Thursday. Friday, I got him booked on a show in South Texas. Saturday, he did my show. And then Sunday, we sat and talked. And there was some crying involved. There was some anger involved. There was some soul searching. There was, and at the end of the day, it was like, man, if this is what you want to do, you need to call up. Don't call Shawn. Call Matt Bloom. If you call Shawn, of course, Shawn's going to go to bat for you, and you're going to be in that position. Well, you only got the job because of Shawn. Don't call Shawn. Call Matt Bloom. You got the numbers. Call Matt Bloom. And he did. And look where he's at. Bryan Danielson, he just, he this is his deal. He was born to be a wrestler. The Total Diva stuff, I don't know what that came from, but seeing him on TV and stuff, it's like, where is this coming from? But that he's fit in very well, and he's done well for himself. You know, and seeing them on TV, man, I just like, you know, couldn't be prouder.
Do you have a favorite episode of Total Bellas that he was in?
Actually, I don't even watch the show. I've seen a couple of clips here and there. The one that stands out though is there was a there was an episode where they were talking about he couldn't have kids or something like that, and I was like, "Click! I don't I don't want to see this. I don't see those guys." Even though like Brian Kendrick just had his I think his 40th birthday, 38 years old or something now or something. To me, they're still 18 years old, man. They're still, you know, they're still kids to me.
And everyone remembers the vignette you were part of with JBL, where he was doing something where he was patrolling the Mexican border, I guess, and he gave you a boot to the back. Uh, do you have any memories of that day you could share with us?
I know he kicked me right in the ass. I mean, with the point of that boot, and it was like, ah, you know, it wasn't on purpose though. It was a lot of fun, and it was. And so back to the independence, Bruce had asked me about getting a guy to do that spot, you know, and I called a couple of people that I knew that fit the role. He wanted uh, Bruce Pritchard wanted a Hispanic family, a guy and his wife and the grandmother and 3 or 4 kids, you know, a typical Hispanic family. And so I knew a couple of guys and I called them and they were like, you know, what's it for? He didn't tell me what it was for. He just said, this is what we need. So when I called the guys that I knew, they were like, what's it for? Why do they want us to do this? Are they paying us? What's it for? How long is it going to be? What, you know, stuff like that. And all I could tell him was this is what they need. That's it. I don't I don't know what it's for. I don't know who it's for. I don't know how long. Are you going to get paid? It's Vince McMahon, so I'm sure you're going to get something. And which is back to what I was telling you about with Shawn was that's what he was getting to. Why is he going over? Why can't I go over? What's the long term thing here? What's you know? And so here these guys are asking all these questions. So I called Bruce and I'm like, I can't find nobody, man. And so Bruce said, "Do you want to do it?" And I was like, you know, sure, you know. He goes, all right, we got somebody. We got a woman and a grandmother, and we got like 2 kids. He goes, just show up at JBL's place, and I'm like, JBL, what the heck? He goes, just show up at JBL's place Thursday at 6 o'clock. I'll give you the directions. Pick up Paul London on the way over here, and we'll fill you in on the rest. And so I did, and that's whatever you saw is what came out. We started at 6 o'clock or 6:30 or so filming, and we were done like at 1 o'clock in the morning or something. And what you saw is what happened. You know, we did like 3 or 4 takes, and the first time we did the deal was they JBL was going to do his little, you know, I'm here at the border and that type of stuff. And then we get a cue and we're supposed to come around the corner, and then that's where he says, you know, stop, John Layfield, Texas Ranger, or whatever he said, you know. And then I'm supposed to turn around. I'm supposed to be, you know, like, no, senor, por favor, you know, that type of stuff. And I'm supposed to turn around, and he was supposed to, like, kick me. The first time we did that, I don't know if it was me or it was him, but he kicked me right with those pointed cowboy boots right in the target area. And I just went to the ground. I was paralyzed. I was like, ah, you know, and you know, Bruce was like, cut, 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 you know, and you know, Layfield was, you know, you're right, brother, you're right. And I was like, son of a gun. But I mean, you know, we ended up getting it right, and it was a lot of fun doing it. And I got paid very well, you know. It was very cool to do.
So that was at JBL's house where you
Yeah,
filmed it?
he had a piece of property that I'm not sure exactly how many acres, but it was huge. Somebody asked him, you know, how much of this is yours, and he said, right where the sky meets the ground, that's you know, that's my. And then you look this way, and that's my area also, and over this way, and that's my, you know, this whole area is mine, and it was like huge.
And for Bruce Pritchard, what's your relationship been like with him over the years? You probably knew him, I guess, since Houston wrestling.
Yes, Bruce was the ring announcer and did the Gopher guy, I guess, or he worked for Paul Bosch. And I was just going to Houston to ride with the guy, or I refereed a couple of shows there also. Um, and then when I started, when I was down here with Joe, Tom was his brother Tom was breaking in, and he was down here also. And just through the years, man, just kept in touch. Bruce has always been nice to me. Tom's always been nice to me. Uh, I have a great deal of respect for both guys. Uh, I have a great relationship with them.
Are you surprised that Bruce is back now after all these years as head of creative for both Raw and SmackDown?
I'm surprised, but not surprised. Uh, Bruce is familiar with the company. He has a great mind for what Vince wants to do. He knows the company better than anybody else. He's been there longer than anybody else. He's been there from almost uh, from the mid '80s. He's so. When he was doing the podcast thing with Conrad, um, and listening to tell the stories and stuff, uh, you, and then seeing the numbers go up the way that he was getting, I had a feeling eventually Vince is going to call him back. As, if anything, to be able to have the his podcast on the network, but then also with knowing what Bruce knows, bring him into the office and get some ideas off of him and stuff. So yeah, I had a feeling that was going to happen. Bruce is again great, mind for the business.
And I had some fan questions here that I'll finish off with. You don't have to go into too much detail on them, but somebody wanted to know why you're known as T.O. Rudy.
So so uh, Dio in Spanish is uncle, and I guess I'm not, I don't even know exactly the reason, but I guess it's because a lot of guys down here come to me for advice. Some don't come for me advice at all. I just give it to them anyway. But I always try and help the guys, the local guys around here, um, get better or, um, whatever they need. There was a promotion down in South Texas where somebody got hurt, and it was because they didn't have the padding on the ring wasn't that good. So I gave them mine. I mean, my bottom line is, um, I try and do what I can to make the wrestling business in Texas better. And there's a lot of kids down here, man, that are very, very, very talented. And you're starting to see them now, like Gino Medina, Ricky Starks, ACH, Keith Lee, who just he was just on NXT this past Wednesday and double champion. I mean, there's a lot of kids that I train, Max Castellano and Moonshine Mantel. So I try and do whatever I can to help them out. I'll get a message at midnight. Hey, you know, what do you suggest I do for this or this or this? So I guess a lot of guys look at me not so much as a father figure, but as an uncle, which is cool.
Speaking of Keith Lee, you trained wrestlers at the Performance Center a couple of times as a guest coach down there. I saw the picture of you and Lee. How were those experiences for you?
Keith is a great uh, individual. I used him a few years ago on some of my shows. He'd been around for a while, and the thing about Texas kids is and maybe it's everywhere. I don't know, but they just want to stay here in Texas. And I took guys to Ring of Honor to try and get exposure for him stuff. And so Keith was he's very talented. He's a great kid and stuff. And so I just I called him one day, uh, Samoa Joe had just got released from TNA, I believe. And so he called me up and he's like, "Hey, I got some dates. I'm open for some bookings if you can use me and stuff." I said, "All right, let me see what I can do." And Keith popped into my head. So I called up. And go, "Hey, can you come down?" As a matter of fact, July 11th, 2015. I asked Keith, "Can you come down? Would you mind coming down and working for me with Samoa Joe? I have the show coming up, and you can learn something. You can get the rub and whatever, and which is exactly what I was trying to do." And he said, "Man, no problem." So him and Joe worked. They did a match, and you know, full transparency, Joe kind of blew him up a little bit, but Keith learned. He's very talented, very good, but he still needed some work. So, um, and he admitted that, but he learned. And so I said, "All right." So a few months later, Brian Cage messaged me, who is, and he still is, who was very hot at the time, but he is still now to this day. And so Brian and Joe kind of are similar to an extent. So I messaged Keith again. "Hey man, I got Brian Cage coming down, Lucha Underground guy. Want to work with him? By all means." So came down and did a little bit better conditioning wise, but the way and the way the business works is word of mouth. So they had their match. Brian said he did very well. So somewhere along the line, a couple of weeks later, something, Brian was supposed to work with somebody up in New Jersey for one of the promotions up there, up in the Northeast. The guy said he couldn't make it. So then Brian called me and said, "Do you have Keith Lee's number?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. What's up?" And he said, "So and so's not going to make it. So I'm going to see if they want to bring him up." So they call him up. Keith Lee makes the date. And there you go. Um, Next thing, almost like from one day to the next, he's all over the place. He was with Ring of Honor, then he got picked up by Evolve, and now he's in. The main guy in NXT. But Keith is like no downside at him at all, man. He's a great, great young man, great personality. I mean, I can't think of anything negative to say about him. He's just, big kid, but very athletic, great attitude.
And for Paul Diamond, a fan wanted to know what were your thoughts on working with him over the years with Shawn Michaels promotion.
Uh, Me and Paul bumped heads often. I'm not saying I dislike him or anything like that. I don't dislike him at all. I like Paul very much. I think Paul, and that was one of the reasons. Another reason why Shawn kind of folded the promotion stuff was things just weren't great. Um, there were some issues there, and so Paul ended up leaving, and we weren't on good terms. I But I knew Paul also when he was down here years ago in the '80s for Fred Barron's wrestling deal. Him and Paul and Shawn were partners, and as the American Express. And Paul is very talented, man. Paul was very, very good. He was Kato with the Orient Express. I mean, you know, wrestling wise, great guy. But he had some issues. And in all honesty, I wish my relationship was with Paul Diamond could have been better. Um, but you know, um, I mean, what can you do?
And as far as Masada, you trained him as well. There was a fan question that they wanted me to ask you about him.
Great guy. Little demented in the brain, but I mean, Masada does the. So when I went, I was Masada's dad was paying me to drive to Beaumont, Texas, where he's from, on Saturdays and train with them. Saturday afternoons, and I did, and we did. There was no day where we practiced, where we trained for going through tables or barbed wire matches. We did. Brigham is a very, very accomplished, very well uh, uh, technical wrestler. He's very good at that stuff. He can go through. He can do a whole match just bam, bam wrestling. Doesn't need the baseball bats and the skewers, and he doesn't need that stuff. But that's his niche, and he's done well at it. But I mean, he doesn't. In my opinion, he doesn't need it. But I mean, I'm happy for him. Apparently, he's gotten married, and you know, I like Brigham Masada very much. I mean, I like him a lot. He's very very good.
And what are your thoughts on Jose Lothario?
Um, so so years ago, so one of the reasons why I really didn't catch on to wrestling was one of those shows that my dad took me to um, when I was 10 or 11 years old or so. Was Jose was there, and so my dad gave me a piece of paper and a pen, and go get his autograph, and stuff like that. And when I went, Jose completely kayfabe me, completely just ignored me. And so they're getting ready to do the TV show, and so a police officer, kind of made me leave, and so I always had this bad memory of him. When we worked when we worked together with Shawn. Well, wait. So Jose started helping a guy run some shows in Laredo, Texas. So Jose brought me in to work at the main event. It was like me and somebody against Mil Mascaras and somebody, and we're the main event. And so when I got paid, uh, my envelope was short, very short, and that's where I said, you know what, screw this. I'm done with wrestling. I'm not. I'm done. And that's you know I quit the business. When Shawn brought me in to do the school, he brought in Jose and Ken because those were the guys that trained him, and I was kind of like the outside guy. Um, so one of the things that we agreed on was when we started the school was we were going to treat the students, and we weren't going to try and old school them. We weren't going to like take their money and beat them up and then chase them off. Or we were going to train them. Um, so when after a few weeks, Shawn went to go do Pacific Blue in Hawaii. So I left me, Jose, and Ken Johnson to run the training. And Jose just turned that week into just old school and was trying to um, discourage the guys from training. And it just so happened Shawn's mom walked in one day and saw this. Some of the guys were getting hurt, taking bumps that they weren't supposed to be taking. And so she asked me, she goes, "What are these guys doing?" Because guys were rolling out of the ring, holding their shoulder and my back and my side and my leg. And I'm like, man, I don't know. Jose's the one that's calling this. And I didn't say that to get him in trouble. I said it because I didn't want to get in trouble. So she called Shawn up, and then this was the week. As a matter of fact, this was the week that Owen died. So that same night that Owen died, Shawn called me up and was like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, you know, I thought he was calling about Owen Hart. So I said, "Owen just fell, man. I think he's dead." It's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "What's going on with Jose?" And so I was like, "Oh, well," I explained to him what was going on and stuff. And so he called Jose and ended up firing him. But while me and Jose and Shawn worked, I mean, me, Jose, and Ken worked together. I was never mistreated when I was trained. I was never, I even though some of the guys may not have liked me, no one ever tried to run me off. And Jose was very old school, and And you know, the impression I was getting was he was trying to run these guys off, and we didn't agree on the training methods. We didn't agree with that stuff, and so I respect him for. I respect Jose immensely for everything he's done business wise. Dusty Rhodes told me that Jose was like one of the top baby faces he's ever worked with. Um, Jose has a notch. He has a name here in Texas. He's a huge star, and I greatly respect him for that. But the interactions that I had with him, though, again, I wish we would have gotten along better and stuff. But it was just I was trying to run the school one way. I was trying to train guys one way. He was trying to do things a little bit differently.
And you mentioned you wrestled Mil Mascaras. I got to ask you about your interactions with him.
Never had a problem with him. When I was breaking in, when I was working for Joe, I was the guy that drove guys around. So there was a couple of times when he brought Mil Mascaras in, I drove him around. The first time I drove him, to the town and back, never took his mask off. But then, like the second time around, it was Mil and it was a Pedro Aguayo and it was this guy Enrique Vera. Um, Mil took his mask off. And we talked and whatever, and Mil was always cool with me. He, I see guys, I see stuff online, and he was lazy and that type of stuff. And the match we had in Laredo, Texas, I actually had 3 matches with Mil Mascaras: one in San Antonio, one in Laredo, and one in Mexico. And I didn't see anything. I mean, he was, he was Mil Mascaras. Am I gonna bump him around and clothesline the heck out of him and make him? No, that's he. I never had a problem with him. I have a total great respect for him and what he's done, and I don't get the negativity.
Would he walk into the back of the arena with the mask on and pretty much always have it on from the time he's in the building?
As a matter of fact, I just saw him a couple of years ago, and he did a show. So everybody talks about he walks in with a mask and stuff. He also walks in with a suit. He has a suit as not a gym bag like everybody else carries, but he has a briefcase with his gear in it. Mil Mascaras is very professional, very this, and as we all should be, I guess. But you know, again, I've never had any issues with him. I mean, and yes, he did wear his mask everywhere he went. Um, but that's the lucha libre. That's the Mexican custom. That's what they're supposed to do.
And you had a fan comment from Victor Valdez saying he still has your Chevy in his lot that you left there 17 years ago. I don't know if you know what he's talking about.
I have no idea. I don't know.
Okay. And the last question I'll ask you before we get into your school is, what's your best advice for heels out there?
My best advice, if you want to be a bad guy, I guess, is be a bad guy. It's be the heel. You can't be a bad guy and take pictures with kids. You can't be a bad guy and then sit out at your merch table, selling your T-shirts and stuff. You've got to play that role. And I'll say this: wrestling fans aren't stupid. They're not dumb. They want to believe. Even today, they want to believe whatever it is that we do, whatever you want to call it. They want to believe it's legit. So do it. Let them believe you're an ass or whatever. Let them believe whatever you want. What's that kid MJF or whatever?
From AEW.
Perfect example, man. He I've seen stuff he puts online, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, But he's the bad guy. and you got, it's up to you to push that envelope as far as you want to push it. But you also got to remember that, especially today in 2020, there's you have to be able to weather the storm. Because you may whatever I did in 1984 will still work today. You'll just get a different reaction. If I say, Gino Hernandez used to point out certain guys in the audience and tell them, "Shine my shoes. I'll make you shine my shoes." And guys would be, "F you, whatever." Do that today, and you're a racist, but you're a bad guy. So you have, and maybe that's pushing it too far, but push it as far as you can without, and as long as you can take the heat, you know, uh, don't be afraid. That's what wrestling needs now is good guys and bad guys. I saw the Keith Lee and Adam Cole match. A great match. Did you see it?
I did not see it. I read about it.
Great
I'm not
match.
a big Adam Cole fan.
Great match though. But who's the bad guy?
Exact. There is no real distinction anymore.
No, and that's what in my opinion that's what's killing the wrestling business is everyone knows to do flips and dives and blah 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 and all that stuff, and that's great. But this isn't gymnastics. Gymnastics is down the street. This is as far as I was taught, this is you are emulating a fight. And so in every fight, there's, and you're telling a story. So there's got to be good, there's got to be evil. The guys being evil, you got to be evil, and you got to be mean, and you got to be, whatever. And you can't turn around and go, ha ha ha, I'm just playing. It doesn't work. I think that if guys took that role more seriously, they would be in more demand. You know, uh, because that actually draws money.
Now, as far as your training school, do you still operate the Texas Wrestling Academy?
Yes, yes.
Where can we find out more information about that if any of the fans here are interested in learning the trade?
On Facebook, I'm at the Texas Wrestling Academy. Um, what's that? Instagram, Texas Wrestling Academy. Um, the email address is Texas Wrestling Academy _SA@yahoo.com, or you can call me at 210-326-1520. I encourage, not just for me, I encourage this for everybody. Um, Research the wrestling school you're trying to go to. Don't just go to a school because it's near your house or because it's cheaper. Um, who has the guy produced? How long have they been training? Where have they been? That type of stuff. I get a lot of guys that message me about training, and during the discussion they say, "Well, I went to this place and that guy didn't know what he was doing and what have you." And then I say, "Okay, well, this is what we do. This is what we do. Da da." And the price is blah blah blah. And they say, "Well, I already paid this guy. What am I supposed to say? What can I do?" I mean, that's not. They made a mistake. I hate saying it this way, but they made a mistake. And it mainly because they just didn't do the research.
What's the average time that people usually train with you before they start getting booked in actual matches?
4 months, 4, 5, 6 months. Everyone's different. Some guys like Brian Danielson, those guys, they started wrestling. They started doing matches in 3 months. And again, it goes to just putting their foot on the pedal and just go. I mean, they just bam, 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 bam. And today, I mean, there's guys that I'm training that we cover something. What's today? Friday. We may cover something Monday, and I got to repeat it again Wednesday because they forget. And that tells me where exactly is your head. You know, a lot of guys want to get into wrestling school because it's cool, and they see it on TV, and they want to be on Raw or SmackDown or Dynamite or whatever else is out there. But there's a lot more. Again, wrestling is this much compared to all this other stuff. It's just guys don't understand the commitment, that you got to put into this to make it work.
Obviously, the indie scene there probably isn't running too much with the lockdown, but is the Texas scene healthy otherwise before all this started?
So there's a few promotions. I mean, there's a bunch of promotions in Texas, but again, everyone's shutting down. There is one promotion that's doing TV, called SWE Fury, Southwest Wrestling Entertainment Fury, and you can pull them up on the Roku channel or whatever. But I mean, they just did a taping the other day with Animal. Teddy Long is their general manager. Um, they got a bunch of kids from down here, Moonshine Mantel, Max Castellano. They got a bunch of kids, Brent McKenzie. They got a bunch of kids from down here that are getting that TV experience. And they're trying to weave their way through. They just got started and they're getting their feet going, and then the coronavirus hit. Um, and then, of course, there's Booker over in Houston. Same thing. He does TV. He does a TV show. He tape once a month, but it's mainly in Houston, though. The Southwest Wrestling Entertainment Group. They're everywhere. They're all over the country. Um, Everyone else, man, there's guys that are trying to do shows, but I've seen several shows have been scheduled, and then they get canceled because the governor, because of the virus and stuff, has shut stuff down or whatever. I mean, I run a show in San Antonio once a month, the first Saturday of the month, but because of the virus, I'm not touching it. I'm not, the running a wrestling show is the furthest thing from my mind right now. But guys can still train, man. Guys can, uh, back in the day, we used to wrestle, do shows every night of the week. Um, you can still do that. You just every night just won't be in front of a crowd, but you can be in a ring somewhere, and depending on where you're at, do matches, do mock matches or what have you, and get good critique from whoever. So that when we do start running on a regular basis, you're a different worker than you were in March. You know, um, but again, guys, you know, for some guys, wrestling is Saturday night. That's it.
Now, San Antonio, they've got to have some pretty good Mexican food there, I imagine.
Blanco Cafe. So years ago, when we would do TV for Joe Blanchard on Mondays, right around the corner, 100 feet from the building, was a place called the Blanco Cafe, and great enchiladas. They had one plate where it's like you get 3 enchiladas, rice and beans, and then you got a crispy taco and a chalupa, and that would fill me up. Um, Brody would eat 3 of those. Wahoo would eat 2 of those. Not Abdullah, what's his name? Armand Hussein would eat 3 of those. They just,
Abdullah would eat 10.
yeah.
Well, thanks a lot for talking to us. Do you have any personal social media that people can follow you on as well?
No, I mean, everything of me is just the Texas Wrestling Academy, man. That's my deal, and um, I, that's all I do is help guys out. It's not so much training guys as much as also just helping guys out, man. I try and my thing is to try and make the wrestling business better, and I'm crossing my fingers. Hopefully, I've gone, like you mentioned earlier, I've gone to the Performance Center twice. If I were to get if I were to ever get picked up by those guys, yes, I'll be training the at the Performance Center, but I'll also keep an eye on the independents and trying to help guys make that. Hopefully, I can be the bridge to make that step into the bigger platform.
Any final comments you want to leave us with as we shut this down? It's been a pleasure hearing about all your stories from Southwest. I wish I was a little bit, wish I'd been born earlier so I could have experienced that era.
Working the territories was great. I worked for World Class in Southwest, and uh, went down to Mexico, whatever. Uh, it was a different time, and guys today don't know what they missed. I mean, it was a great time, and and you wrestled every night of the week, and you learned, and you're around. Back then, I was around a bunch of guys that I didn't realize who I was actually around. And now I look back and, man, I had lunch with Nick Bockwinkel and Bobby Heenan. I had lunch with Harley Race. Uh, I drove around with the Raging Bull, Manny Fernandez, and Chavo Guerrero, and uh, I rolled around the ring with Lou Thez. I got stretched by Lou Thez. You know, I mean, it was a different time then. But guys that are out there listening to this stuff, man, just we're in a downtime, we're in the virus and what have you, and just don't let that discourage you. I've seen a lot of guys post on social media. Well, maybe it's time I gave it up. No, man, it's time to you know bring yourself back stronger or better or more knowledgeable or more. There's just because we're down doesn't mean that we're down. There's still things you can do.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Support us on patreon.com for $1.99 a month to watch our full shoot interviews ad-free and help our channel grow. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.